Good afternoon, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're so excited to welcome Jessica Grose here in conversation with Mary Cain for a discussion of Screaming on the Inside, the Unsustainability of American Motherhood. In this timely and necessary book, New York Times opinion writer Jessica Grose dismantles 200 years of unrealistic parenting expectations and empowers today's mothers to make choices that actually serve themselves, their children, and their communities. Jessica is an opinion writer at the New York Times. She is also the author of 2 novels, Soulmates and Sad Desk Salad. She was named a top professional under 35 by LinkedIn in 2016, and Glamour called her a game changer in 2020 for her coverage of parenting during the pandemic. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and daughters. And she's joined today by Mary Cain, who is an associate professor of history at Agnes College. She is the author of several articles and reviews that consider issues of race, gender, privilege, power, and domesticity in the antebellum United States. Her teaching interests include African American history, the history of slavery, Native American history, and U.S. women's history. In recent years, she has received both the Faith Yao Yu Chow Faculty Excellence Award and the Vulcan Materials Company Teaching Excellence Award. In January, she was appointed editor of the Teaching Network within HNet, the online platform from the humanities and social sciences, and looks forward to serving the academic community in that role. So welcome to you both. We're so glad you're here. So glad to have folks watching with us worldwide, and of course, our Agnes Scott community. I was saying, I love Jessica's pieces in the New York Times, and especially your recent top 10 most annoying toys piece. So I am personally excited. I know we have so many folks who are young parents, recent parents, new parents, people who became parents in the pandemic. And also a lot of our Agnes Scott Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies students are on this call. So we have a really nice, varied mix of folks watching. So we will get right into it. So welcome to you both, and welcome, Mary. Thank you for being with us to host this conversation.
Great. Thank you, ER. And Jessica, it's such a treat for me to get to have this conversation with you. I've been reading your work for years, and I really appreciated your recent book, the way you've given voice to so many feelings that parents have been experiencing lately. And I think we could say that female parents have been experiencing for quite a while. So I did want to start with that question about gender, right? The subtitle of your book is The Unsustainability of American Motherhood, Not American Parenthood. And so could you talk a little bit maybe about your focus on female parents and, beyond obviously the important realities of pregnancy and childbirth, why is it in 2023 that parenting is different for women than for men?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. I think the biggest way in which parenting is still different for mothers is the cultural expectations. What was such a revelation in terms of all of the interviews I did for this book, and I interviewed over 100 mothers, was even if you were trying to have the most egalitarian, ungendered experience of parenting, and you could sustain that in your own home, the outside world would make a lot of assumptions about you and your role and what you should be doing, and pressure you to act as if a certain ideal, a certain, often outdated ideal. So an example I think about a lot is a woman who felt that she really had a very 50-50 split with her husband. It had been like that for their whole relationship. She made him read Arlie Hochschild's The Second Shift when they started dating in college, just to lay down the law at the beginning, saying historically, women and mothers have taken on more domestic responsibility, and that is unfair. And if you want to be with me, it's not going to be that way. And she described over and over again having to train the people who interacted with her family that she was not the primary parent. So the example that I give in the book, her husband managed the children's pediatrician and dental appointments. The dentist kept calling her to schedule these appointments. And she kept saying, do not call me, call my husband. He does this. And the receptionist said, well, don't you know his schedule? And she was like, no, I don't know his schedule. Like, so even, with the best intentions and surrounding yourself only with people who do treat parents of any gender as equal parents, you're brushing up against a lot of resistance. And that's just sort of one small way. There's ways big and small every single day that we are encountering this. The sort of cliche, but happens all the time, is a dad's out with a kid at a supermarket or the park, and someone praises them. Oh, you're such a great dad, just for simply existing with a child in public. And, the alternate experience that a lot of moms have is, instead of, just even a neutral experience, it's like they're getting criticized. Like I remember my older daughter would always take her socks off. I could not keep a sock on this baby. She's 10 now. And I cannot tell you the number of times people would corner me and be like, your baby's feet are cold. Why don't you have socks on? And I'm like, I can't super glue them to her feet. So again, these are small things, but they add up. And then, there's obvious penalties at work and experiences at work and challenges at work that mothers who choose to or need to work experience that dads just don't encounter. So, there's so many levels of social and cultural expectations that I think are challenging for mothers that fathers don't encounter in quite the same way, which is not to say that parents of any gender don't have their own challenges and their own expectations. For heterosexual men, I hear a lot of, expectations to be the breadwinner, to really act as if they do not have children at work, and for being punished if they are lucky enough to have paid paternity leave, for taking the entire leave. So, these sort of strict gender roles about what parents should be doing are harmful to everybody. But I focused on motherhood just because we have historically, they've done the majority of caregiving. And as a culture in 2023, we still have so many expectations of what a mother should be and what a mother should be doing that I think we still have to push back against.
And so much of what you wrote about very much rings true to me as a woman, as a mother. I also read the book as an historian. That's my field of training. And so I really especially appreciated the way you grounded your book with that early chapter on where these expectations came from, right? These cultural expectations about gender and about motherhood have been with us for a long time. I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about those historical pieces that you looked at, and where you place some of the origins of the gender expectations we live with today.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, from a historian, it means so much. And I hope I did an okay job. It was cramming a lot into like 10,000 words. So I was always very mindful of hopefully not taking too many liberties or truncating the really important parts, but I'm sure I didn't always succeed. I tried my best. So I mean, the idea that mothers should be self-sacrificing and martyr themselves and put themselves last in the family structure and be subordinate to their husbands. I mean, those ideas are old, thousands of years old, Judeo-Christian ideals of the structure of the family. To bring it to an American context, what mothers and fathers should be, and even our ideas of childhood have really given that self-sacrifice was always at the core for mothers. I think the ideas of how a mother or a father should behave have evolved quite a bit over the past, 200-300 years. I mean, to start, all of our ideals are idealizing white Christian mothers. So when we still had slavery, enslaved mothers were treated barely as mothers at all. They were separated from their children. They were just, the most inhumane, sexually assaulted, the most inhumane treatment that mothers could ever experience. I mean, reading historical accounts of what these mothers had to go through is just absolutely gut-wrenching. And so that was happening, obviously, in the, very early days of America. But in the colonial period, fathers were really quite involved with their children because everything was happening within the household. Everyone lived in a domestic space. You weren't, it was unusual to be going out to work because it was pre-industrial revolution. And so, children were not treated the way children are treated today. If you were a child in, 1700, you were working. You had a role in the family. You were, churning butter at 3 or whatever. So the idea of, all of this unstructured time that you're supposed to be cultivating your child is a very new idea. And the idea that it is more of a mother's job than a father's job to be doing this sort of intellectual and physical cultivation, that sort of really came up during, the period of the Industrial Revolution when there was more of a division between the domestic sphere and the public sphere. And so then we started getting the idea that men were the ones who went out to work and women stayed home. A big asterisk there because obviously Black women always worked and immigrant women always worked. Poor women, they were working this whole time. So this idea that, women have never worked, false. Women and mothers have always worked. It's just the ideal, which was this, middle to upper middle class, usually white Christian mother, increasingly was confined to the domestic sphere. And you saw that happening. That was more 19th century. By the 20th century, women and mothers started to be college educated. They started to, desire a voice and a life outside the domestic sphere and desired for more political power. And so, I think World War II was sort of the big moment where more and more women and more and more mothers started to work. There was actually publicly funded childcare for mothers who worked in factories. And so we know that it can be done, even though we don't do it. And then in the post-war period, there was a real push to get women out of the workforce and back in the home. And mothers just were not happy to do that. They saw that they could have an identity and a life separate from just the domestic work, which is not to say that, caregiving and domestic work isn't extremely important and just as valuable a way to spend time. But I think, lots of people will have desires to do both. And so then sort of the cat was out of the bag. And we've seen basically since that post-war period, just more and more, I think pushback against the idea of what a traditional or a good mother looks like. And there's been a lot of moves forward and a lot of moves back, but that's sort of the quick and dirty explanation of where a lot of those ideas came from.
Great, thank you. In your description just now, and certainly in the book, one of the themes that really stands out at me, definitely in the history section, but honestly throughout the book, is the degree to which decisions, policies, and norms have been developed really based on economic needs and principles, right, rather than what families actually need. Another theme that runs throughout the book is that there are some uniquely American issues here in terms of parenting and how parenting is experienced and mothering is experienced in the United States. And you suggest that other societies have done a better job of figuring out some things like childcare and education that works for people. Can you talk a little bit about why it's so hard to support families in the United States? It's not like our economy is so much different, right? What are some of the challenges that we have here that other societies don't seem to have?
Well, I think this sort of very individualistic ethos of American culture, there's good things that came out of it, but a bad thing that comes out of it is that there's the emphasis on just the individual families fending for themselves. And we see that sort of writ large in many ways. I often think the original sin of the American workplace is that there's no universal health care. So the second that we need to have not just jobs, but full-time jobs in order to keep our families healthy denies so much flexibility and different options and just choice and options that, you know, not just parents, but anyone who has caregiving responsibilities might be able to have, or anyone who just wants a life, you know? So, you know, all of our peer nations that are as wealthy economies as the United States have universal health care. They have paid leave. They have more heavily subsidized childcare. They don't put infants in childcare because parents have enough paid leave to last the first year of a child's life. So all of these, it's sort of like you're starting from home plate when everybody else is on second base, to use a tortured sports metaphor. But, you know, all of these other nations have all of these sort of built-in supports that just from the jump make life so much easier for parents and for mothers. And I think something that there's no even way to quantify this. It's something I think about a lot in my own parenting, the sort of psychic stress of knowing how precarious everything is. And I think about, you know, I did not have paid leave with my first child. And I did have paid leave with my second child. It was only 2 months, but it was still so much better. And I think about the experience of those postpartum periods and how much less stressed out I was for the second one, because I knew I still had a job to go back to. We had money coming in. And again, you know, that it seems obvious, right? But just that sort of extra level of stress and discomfort that American mothers and fathers have to go through simply to be parents is, I mean, that's part of why I wanted to focus on American parenting. And I think we are also, you know, and it's so hard to do cross-national and cross-cultural comparison. I mean, even within the United States, we are a huge country with so many different communities that have such different norms. But sort of broadly speaking, I think we are a very child-unfriendly culture. And I hear that just from, you know, parents who feel so uncomfortable taking a child out to just the supermarket, because if your child has a meltdown, you're going to get, you know, shamed or judged or yelled at. And it's like, children should be allowed to be children in the world. I feel that very strongly. And so I think that there's just, again, this sort of added stress and pressure that American parents feel because there's just this feeling that they are ultimately very much on their own. And if anything goes wrong, they feel as if they will be blamed for it.
Yeah, the sections in your book, and it's just a theme that kind of keeps recurring about guilt and shame, I think, really do strike a chord with anybody who reads it who's a parent. There's so much that I'd like to talk about, but one really intriguing nugget in your book is you write about a study of parenting. It was a survey of 1,500 people asking about how they understood parental roles. It was a survey that was conducted first in August of 2019 and then again in August of 2020, which gave the researchers a chance to kind of capture that beginning of the pandemic, right? And what's happening as people are thinking about parenting right there at the beginning of the pandemic. And it showed that in that space of time, Americans' attitudes about parenting had become, in your words, more retro, right? People were kind of starting to rely back more on traditional gender stereotypes as they were thinking about who parents should be at the beginning of the pandemic. Women doing more domestic and caretaking role, fathers being understood as disciplinarians, certainly fathers being understood as having the main, you know, their main responsibility to the family was financial and economic, and they had to go out and make sure they were working. I'm wondering, this book was written obviously in a very particular context with the COVID-19 pandemic. If you could talk a little bit about why the experiences of the pandemic perhaps caused people to rediscover, or in some cases, or double down in other cases on these gender norms.
Well, I think a lot about what the sociologist Leah Rapaner told me when I asked her, it's like, why did we behave this way? And she said, because it was there. It's almost like a security blanket. If we just go back to the way things used to be, that will be comforting in this time of stress and tumult. I think there's also obvious economic reasons why it happened. I mean, structurally, mothers make less than, if they're in heterosexual relationships, they make less than their male partners. And so if you are in a crisis situation where one job has to be prioritized, of course, you're going to prioritize. It's economically rational to prioritize the job that makes more money. And so a lot of moms, I cannot tell you how many mothers I've spoken to over the past 3 years who cut their hours, who stepped back from a full-time job, who just could not make the math add up to maintaining their work while, we are still down, so we're almost exactly 3 years into this. There's 80,000 fewer childcare workers than there were pre-pandemic. And there's great reasons for that. Mostly they are underpaid severely, which, I mean, I can't, I know some people who ultimately homeschooled their kids after the pandemic, and God bless them. That is the last thing that I ever wanted to do after attempting to teach second grade and preschool in 2020. I was like, this is an impossibly hard job, and I would love to leave this to the professionals. There's so many good reasons why, those workers deserve better pay, better security, all of the things. It's like, I just want to give them all of the things. Their work is so valuable to society and individuals. I think families on a micro level, we're making rational economic decisions. But on a macro level, we see the effects.
As a follow-up, if you don't mind, I'd like to read just a little bit of a paragraph from the same section of your book. You follow through after describing the results of this study. You say, the only non-traditional attitude in August 2020 was that there was more support for both mothers and fathers earning money. This combination of expectations, mothers should earn money, but also stay home with young children, is actually the worst of all possible worlds. That's just not fair, right? So what are some of the other lessons that you have taken from parenting, from mothering during a pandemic? You write a lot in the book about the opportunities it gave you in your own household, with your children, with your parents. And it sounds like in the end, you feel like there might be some lessons we can take from our experiences with COVID-19 and the way it stressed our already stressed system that we can learn from.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, one of the big lessons that, everybody can do without our sclerotic federal government actually doing what they should be doing. Well, I can't force that to happen. But one of the big lessons for me was just the importance of multi-generational families. If you look back through history, a nuclear family, a single parent family, isolated, was not how children have ever been raised. You need more than two people to, have, it's a cliche, but it does take a village. And so we, so that we could both keep our jobs, we moved in with my parents for a part of the pandemic. And at first I was, nervous about how that would work out, just because, living with your parents when you're 38, as I was at the time. But it turned out to be a beautiful experience, actually, for all 6 of us. I mean, the importance of your children having relationships with trusted adults who are not you is just so valuable to everybody involved. Because your parents are your parents, and you don't want to tell them everything. And I would much rather my children have guidance from other, smart adults who have their best interest in mind than from those some other dumb kids who just are not, who are as clueless as they are. So I think it's, and obviously not everyone has a good or affirming relationship with their family of origin. And so expanding your chosen family, and not, one thing that I hear so much from parents is that it's so hard to ask for help, and they feel so guilty, either because they think that they should be able to do everything themselves, which is just not reasonable, or because they think it's such a burden to ask people to spend time with your children. And I think I would just love to reframe that a bit, because I think not only have, like I said, my children really benefited from, spending time with other adults in their life who are not us, the adults have benefited. So we have a very dear friend who lives in the apartment next door to us. She does not have kids. She comes and she hangs out with our kids for an hour just to give us a break. She brings her dogs. It gives her, and it's delightful for her. And so I think I started always feeling, bad, like, oh, you don't have to come, see the girls, like you probably have something better to do. But I think obviously, don't drag somebody over who hates children. And, but I think in so many circumstances we perceive that and it's part of, the residue of living in such a child unfriendly culture. We assume that we're burdening people. And I just think that, really thinking about that and reframing that and knowing that that's not always the case, I think it can be mutually beneficial for everyone in the orbit.
Great. Thank you. I do have a couple more topics I'd like to cover, but I wanted to remind the audience that there is an option for you all to ask questions as well. I think ER is monitoring the questions, so please do feel free to send them our way. One of the other big themes of your book, as you're talking about modern parenting, has to do with social media, right? And that, pandemic aside, in many ways, parenting is easier now than it has been in previous generations, right? Obviously, we have washing machines and antibiotics and better diapers and things like that. Yes. But we also have Instagram and the internet. And that gives us additional ways in which these problems of cultural expectations and the pressures to be some kind of ideal mother can be really damaging for American women. You devote a whole chapter to social media in this book on motherhood. Can I ask you what led you to factor that into your thinking, and what you see as, there might be some positive things that mothers get from the digital engagement with others, but some real dangers.
Yes. So, I thought I absolutely had to talk about the role of the internet in parenting. A statistic I cite in the book is that I think around 80% of American parents get health information from the internet. And I think our brains are just not equipped to, and this is everybody, not just parents. Obviously, we read every day about how social media is, affecting democracy, affecting teenagers' brains. This is not exclusive to parenting, but I just think there's no way to adequately neurologically funnel the fire hose of information that we're getting. It is just so much information. And even the most educated, informed parent is going to struggle to sift through. So even if you are getting accurate information, which, you might not always be, developing a sense of scale, I think, is really hard, because there's so much fear mongering. And especially, I think, when your children are really young and they can't talk to you and give you feedback about how they're doing, every decision can feel so consequential. And I think that the internet has such a big role in that flattening effect to make you feel like, oh, well, I fed, like, I was thinking this week. I am not even having researched this. Like, and thought about these ideas for a decade. I am not immune to the guilt and overthinking because of something I read on the internet. So the other week, there was some big story about how terrible bacon is, and I'm just like, oh my God, my children have eaten so much bacon in their young lives. And you know, like they've eaten a lot of other things too, a lot of beautiful, healthy vegetables. Like and also that ship has sailed. The bacon has already been in their system. Like it's not worth stressing about. But I think what social media can do is just make those things seem as if they have outsized impact on the day-to-day of our children's lives. And in terms of sort of influencers and influencer culture, what gets promoted by the algorithm is a very narrow vision of motherhood. And I think, the internet is a huge place. You can find any kind of representation of parenting that you want or desire. But you're often served things that you didn't ask for. And I think that is where we find a lot of the problems, because it's always this ideal of beautiful, thin, blonde, perfect house, perfect children, nobody's ever crying, or, there's no financial difficulties, and everyone just is happy all the time, and they never have conflicted feelings about parenting or their lives. And even intellectually, when we know that that's not real, that it's the highlight reel of their lives, I think our kind of lizard brains want to just fixate on those images. And so it's hard. I mean, one thing that I've been trying out for myself is setting timers of my internet usage. I need the internet for work. I would quit Twitter yesterday if I did not need it to sort of keep an eye on what the conversation was. And I use it as an RSS feed because I get so many articles that I wouldn't find otherwise, and studies that I wouldn't find otherwise. So it's very useful to me. And at least for now, the positives outweigh the negatives. And I heard, in talking to moms for this book, moms especially who were going through really rough times, who had multiple pregnancy losses, who had babies in the NICU, found just invaluable practical support and information through social media. So you can have the best friends in the world who empathize deeply with you. But if they have not experienced something really, challenging like that, they might not be able to give you that same level of sort of solace and support that, a group of mothers from across the world, even who have experienced what you have experienced, can give you. So yes, they're true positives. But I mean, I think just being aware of the unreality of the images that they're showing us. One thing that was sort of shocking to me, I guess not shocking, but surprising, and it all made sense, was a lot of the most successful influencers come from money already. So it's the illusion that they're making the money from just this lifestyle in their image, or it came out of, they've been able to achieve this beautiful, perfect life from their influencing work. But often they have, really, really wealthy family backgrounds. So in terms of this unreality of the situation, I thought that was helpful in unmasking, what's achievable for a regular person.
Right. And one of the other insights that you shared in the book, I found really helpful is, there's so much discourse now around self-care. And it sounds good, like, oh, mothers, take time to take care of yourself. But a lot of what that really means is get your nails done, get your hair done, make yourself look beautiful, thin, healthy, attractive. And so it's not so much about taking care of yourself and your own well-being, but rather playing into that notion of being somehow aesthetically a certain type.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I think our whole culture's sort of idea of wellness is marketed to us. And it's just a new title on the same old ideas of weight loss and Botox and all the old stuff, but it's like just been repackaged in this language of sort of a self-empowerment and health in a way that is just depressing. But I mean, I think sort of true wellness is so much deeper. And that's sort of what I try to get at in the book, not just about, wellness for yourself, but it's sort of wellness for your whole family and what that can look like. And the serious barriers to it. I wrote in December about an organization in Jackson, Mississippi that provides universal basic income to single moms. And Jackson, Mississippi still does not have clean drinking water. And that anyone would put individual pressure on any of those moms to, maintain their children's health when their government has failed them just so dramatically. I mean, I saw a news article this week that Jackson schools were virtual for a bit of this month because they didn't have clean water again in the schools. And that, again, in a country that is as wealthy as the United States, is just a travesty. And so, again, it's, reminding yourself that there are, in depending on the circumstances of your life, a lot of structural barriers to having the sort of ideal wellness, whatever you want to describe that as.
So despite all of the problems and challenges and frustrations and structural deficits you describe in the book, it is on I feel a fairly optimistic note. I was kind of a little surprised and delighted that that's kind of where you arrived. But I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about what makes you hopeful that change is possible.
Well, so number one, I think doing all that historical research really was important, because I think we forget how far things have actually come, especially in the past century. I mean, unimaginable. There is a historian named Alice Kessler Harris who I interviewed for the book. I think she's in her 80s. And one of the days that I think I interviewed her for 2 days, and one of the days we were over Zoom, I was griping. I was like, it feels like nothing's ever going to change. We're stuck in this thing. We can't even get paid leave. We're one of only 2 countries in the entire world that doesn't have paid leave. And she sort of shook her head and she was like, that when I applied for my first job as a public school teacher, I had to sign a contract that said that I would quit if I got pregnant or started showing. And I think about the fact that my mother, who was married in 1972, when she got married, she could not have her own credit card. She could not apply for her own mortgage. So again, that's not to say be complacent. Everything is great. It's to say that we've seen profound change in the past 50 years. And so we know that it's possible because it's happened. I'm also buoyed by the fact that there is incremental change happening all the time. The big pictures can often seem, stuck in amber and nothing's moving forward in at the speed which some of us would hope it would. But as I over the year and a half, 2 years I wrote the book, 2 more states passed paid leave. So Maryland and Delaware. And even as I've been talking about the book for the past month or two, New Mexico recently passed a child care bill that would pay child care providers more money, which they desperately need. And I had the pleasure of speaking to some of the activists who worked on that bill. And they told me it took 10 years. It took 10 years to get the political calculus right, to get legislators on their side. So I think, especially because the period that we are in, the really most challenging in terms of childcare crunch, exhaustion, when our kids are really little, it can seem endless and exhausting. It can seem like nothing is helping us in those moments. When you take the long view, things are moving forward. It's just taking time. And then little things like so many male legislators during the congressional, how do we want to put it, fracas of the past, difficulty choosing a leader, electing a leader. Several male congressmen took their babies, we're caregiving. We're publicly caregiving. And you would not have seen that 10 years ago. I mean, babies were not allowed on the floor of Congress until the past 5 years because Tammy Duckworth fought for it. And I think the sort of notion of caregiving as not just a mom thing. I think because it's not just a mom thing. It's not just a dad thing. It's not just a parent thing. Almost every person will need to give care to someone in their life at some point, whether it's an elderly family member, a friend. It's unusual, I think, to not have caregiving responsibilities be the primary responsibility in your life for some period of time. And so I think treating everybody with more humanity, I'm hopeful that, if nothing else, the awful experience of, COVID has made more people aware that that's a value that we should elevate. So yeah, I try to be hopeful, even in the face of facts to the contrary. Also, just because I don't find despair useful. Because despair makes us complacent. And if we don't keep talking about this and making sure that we're all, voting for legislators that who, value these things as well, doing things in our own communities to move these ideas forward, they won't.
Great. Well, the questions from the audience are starting to come in. So I've got one here from Maddie, who writes, what advice do you have for those of us thinking about starting a family soon? Knowing all of these issues within our country and culture, it's a bit terrifying to someone who wants to be a mother, but who also greatly cherishes their career.
So, I mean, I think first of all, if you can, make sure that you are working someplace where you know that the parents who work there already feel that they are treated humanely. So early when I became pregnant with my older daughter, I had a very bad experience with my employer. And I realized only in retrospect that there was not a single parent of young children, and definitely no mothers at all in positions of power in that company. No senior leadership, no even senior level. And which is not to say that just you need to have, mothers in those levels to have a humane workplace. But I think really being, you can't just snap your fingers and get a new job. But if possible, really investigating what it is like for parents who work at a certain place. If you are at a current job, I think you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what your experience of pregnancy is going to be, or birth, or new motherhood. Those are complete unknowns. But I think giving yourself permission to take a step back if you need to, and knowing that careers are really, really long, longer than maybe some of us would want them to be. I just got something that was like, your projected retirement date is 2047. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know, 2047. But even though it's like, you have the idea that if you don't reach a certain level by a certain age, it's never going to happen. And that's just false. That's not how it plays out for most people. I think especially now, people, they work lots of different places. They have different careers. So I think it's when things are the most challenging, which is when your children are really little, trying to take the long view and just knowing that, if your career is really important to you, just staying in the game is enough. You don't have to be going straight up, staying in it. I mean, I sort of, for reasons outside my control, I didn't want to take a step back when my kids were born, but I got really, really sick during my first pregnancy. I had hyperemesis, which is extreme morning sickness. I got incredibly depressed. I ended up leaving a job that I had just started. I thought my career was over, because who would want to hire someone who leaves a job after a couple months, because it just would look so bad. But I ended up being freelance for 3 years, really hustling to do that and maintain my career. But I was allowed to do it. I was able to do it in a sort of more flexible way. And even though it wasn't what I chose, I rolled with the punches, and it ended up actually being a great way to ease into combining motherhood and career. And then once my kids were a little older, I was able to go back into it full force. And I think if I had left entirely, I would not have been able to do that. So I think it's just not blaming yourself for, again, these structural things that are outside your control. And also saying, you know, as much as this book is about, you know, all of the challenges we face and being transparent and real about all the difficulties, my kids are the greatest joy of my life. I never regret for a second that I, you know, any of the sacrifices or, you know, negative things that have happened. So making totally clear that if people don't want kids, they should not have them. But I really wanted kids. I'm so glad that they are here, even having gone through the struggles. So, you know, we all sort of find a way. I just wish it would be easier for us to navigate.
On that note, there's another question here I'd like to share with you, and this might be a good one to close us out. It's a question from Sarah. Sarah writes, "It is bizarre to me how we are simultaneously a child-centric culture and a child-unfriendly one. It seems like a trap there's no way out of." So the question is, what are practical possible things that individuals can do within a no-win system?
So one thing that I sort of close the book on is the idea that interpersonally, we can really make space for each other to talk about our negative feelings about all this. So, you know, just being there for each other in ways big and small. I mean, that's what we can do. But again, yes, the culture is child unfriendly, but not finding your people, finding your communities, finding places that are welcoming, they exist. It's not all a nightmare disaster. And it doesn't have to be. And I think being, you know, in places where you can be, that you have the power to be, trying to be an agent of change. You know, I think a lot about my workplace. I joke that we should have had a third kid just to take advantage of the Times' very generous maternity leave policy. But that policy exists because a bunch of women fought really hard for it. I think like 10 years ago, it was much, much less generous. And so I am so grateful to those women who stuck their neck out. It was not, you know, management is not going to love you for agitating for more benefits. So if you are, you know, powerful, if you're powerful enough in your own, whatever, you know, organization, not even just at work, but in community, where you can advocate for the parents in your midst, even after you are out of I think that's one thing too that I would love to see more of. And I think it's important that I keep writing about this stuff, even though, you know, I'm never going to have another kid. I don't really need childcare anymore. My kids go to after school at their public school. Like, these things aren't going to benefit me, but I'm still going to talk about them. And I think part of the reason we don't have some of these things in the United States is because once people are out of that sort of really intense crunch period, they're just relieved. And so they're not here fighting for the next generation. So I think just being aware of what you're up against is really important, but then trying to make change in the small ways that you can in your own life. I think we can all do that.
Great. Well, Jessica Grose, thank you so much. You've really done such a useful job of articulating the problems that so many people experience and giving us reasons and action steps to advocate for change. So
thank you so much
really
for
appreciate that.
Appreciate it.
So ER, did you want to come back on now and talk to the group?
Yes, I am coming back up. My camera's just taking a little minute to rejoin here. There we go. All right. Thank y'all both so much. This was a really great conversation. I am sure that everyone watching now definitely needs their copy of Screaming on the Inside, The Unsustainability of American Motherhood. So it really does help us when you buy event books directly from Charis. To do that, you just click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen. It's one click. Go ahead and do that right now. And if you want to support the work of Charis Circle, which is our nonprofit programming arm, that also supports our parenting groups, our teen and children's programming, you may do that by clicking this donate button. Those donations are tax deductible, and it really does help us. We will be adding this to our YouTube channel, so if there's anybody that you're like, oh man, I have a mother friend or a parent friend who really would have benefited from this conversation, let them know that they will be able to see this on our YouTube channel, which is just YouTube.com/Charis Circle in the next couple days. But truly, thank you to both of you. Mary, thank you for interviewing, and Jessica, thank you for this important book. We will look forward to reading more from you weekly in the Times, and maybe another book after you get a nice long rest. But I hope that you both have a good rest of your day. And thanks for being with us at Charis today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you. Have a great day.